Palisade Radio is brought to you by First Majestic Silver Corp., one of the world's purest and fastest growing silver mining companies.
Welcome back to another episode of Palisade Radio. This is your host, Colin Cattell. And returning with us on the program today is Gregor Gregersen. He has quite an operation out of Singapore. He's a bullion dealer and also owns a storage facility. Gregor, welcome back to the program.
Hello, Colin. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Happy to get you back on. Just for our audience members to know, your websites are silverbullion.com.sg and thesafehouse.sg. Could you just give us a brief background on how you got into the silver bullion space?
Well, it started when I used to work in Germany and I used to pay 80% taxes. I was quite unhappy doing that, and I did 2 trips around the world. I looked at different countries, and I found Singapore. I really liked the place. I managed to move to Singapore, and I managed to reduce my taxes to less than 7%, doing the same thing I did in Germany. So I ended up settling here. But as I moved here, there was no place to buy physical silver back in 2009. And that's pretty much how Silver Bullion started. And the reason I wanted to buy physical silver was because I was working in a trading room for Commerzbank, Germany's second biggest bank, building compliance systems and software systems. And I pretty much saw the effects of counterparty, doubts coming up with banks and, a potential banking default. And I realized that owning precious metals was the way to go because you could actually own precious metals as opposed to it being owed to you. So I put one and one together and I said, okay, what we ought to be doing is storing silver and gold in Singapore and storing it in a way that protects you in a systemic crisis. So that was the beginning of Silver Bullion.
Fantastic. And your background, as I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, is a bit in computer programming, which has worked into the systems that you've put in place at Silver Bullion and in your storage facility. What's the size and scale of your operation, just to give listeners an idea of how large your sales are, and also the size of the storage facility, which is a world-class new facility, fully insured. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, well, as far as sales, in US dollar terms, we had about $220 million in sales so far. Currently, we're storing around US dollars around $95 million worth of precious metals for customers at our storage facility. And the storage facility, we built it because we were literally running out of storage space in Singapore. We used to outsource to the Freeport, which is another vault. There had plenty of gold storage capacity, but as more silver was moving in, that was getting quite tight. And so we ended up building our own facility, and we did it also because when you choose a jurisdiction where you want to store your bullion, and you also ought to be looking who you're storing it with. And if you're storing it with, say, US-based company, for example, and if you're planning to protect the bullion from a potential US nationalization, then you're going to have a problem because a US company, whether they're operating in Singapore or somewhere else, is ultimately going to be following US law. So I felt that in order to really protect bullion, you're going to have a local company which does not have exposure back to Europe or the US. And there was no company in Singapore or no vault in Singapore which was able to do that. So between the fact that we're running out of storage space for silver, especially, and because of the jurisdictional issue I was just mentioning, we pretty much decided that we will be investing in setting up this vault. And the vault can hold around 600 tons of silver in a fully segregated manner and around 30 tons of gold. The two are separated because you have different security ratings for gold and silver. And that represents about over 1% of worldwide above ground known silver reserves, according to Thomson Reuters. So we are pretty much the biggest storage facility in Singapore for silver.
Yeah, and most people who I would ask who know anything about storing physical silver or gold would tout Singapore as the number one jurisdiction in the world. Kind of ironic that you filled a niche there. I know that Brinks has a facility. You could probably name the other ones in Singapore, but you figured out that they weren't fully insulated as they were U.S. companies or associated the U.S. For a U.S. investor to store their metal. How many different facilities are there in Singapore?
Well, you see, when you build a vault, you have to decide whether you want to do what I would call a show vault, meaning a vault which is a place you want to bring people. And the Freeport is such a vault. I mean, it's a very impressive sort of building. And it was originally meant to cater to ultra-rich people's Picassos and, art collections. Christie's is in there and so on. So that's the type of vault that people like to talk about. And you might see some videos of the Freeport, on the internet. The other type of facilities that exists is what I call the hole in the wall facility. And these are vaults, which are not very all that nice to show to customers. And so you won't hear much of them. But that's where a lot of bullion is being kept just because, it's less expensive to store. So what we built, I would say, is something in the middle. It's not as grandiose as, say, Freeport, which has a $3 million statue, as you walk in. But it's, quite an impressive facility. It has the same type of auxiliary police as security, and has a very sophisticated storage and control system and so on. So we went this middle way with to set this up. And as you mentioned, the Singapore government, Singapore IE, rated our facility along with the Singapore Freeport as the world-class facilities. And it is the type of facility which people basically want to, let's say, show off. And whenever we have people coming to the Freeport, to the safe house, they're very impressed by the testing we do. Because, as you might know, whatever bullion is coming into the safe house goes through a testing lab. It goes through ultrasound testing, electrical conductivity testing, and X-ray, as well as density. And only at that point is going to be stored. So when somebody comes, we kind of show them how that works. We give them a real coin and a fake coin to kind of show off how these test systems work and so on and so on. So we've gone a long way to address issues which, most world don't really want to address because it involves risk, it involves expertise and so on, that in most cases is not there, or they don't see a need to provide.
Fantastic. And Gregor, as you know, the gold and silver space has seen renewed interest over the past couple months. I was asking you before we got on the call, since you're at the level of getting orders coming in terms of the demand that you've seen in the last year, particularly in the last couple months since gold had that big up day. What's demand been like from your perspective?
For us, we've seen a very large spike of especially silver demand in the third quarter and early fourth quarter of last year. When silver was hitting the 6-year lows, that's when demand was really spiking. And our demand, to give you an idea, went up by about 300%. We were moving around 6.5 tons per month of silver at that time. Then towards the end of the year, things quieted down a little bit. And right now it's picking up again. And we see a bit more gold sales now instead of silver. But it's again starting to pick up. And it's actually a good thing that we had a bit of a pause, because it was getting very difficult to get bullion out of North America. So a lot of our bullion supply actually had to come from either Australia or Turkey. It's from LBMA refineries, just because it was getting very, very difficult to get anything out of North America.
Great. Okay, and Gregor, the reason that we are bringing you on the show right now to talk is a very novel and new concept that you and your company have developed, and it's peer-to-peer lending with backing by Silver Bullion in your vault. This is kind of a foreign concept. You first introduced it to me about a year ago at a conference we met for the second time in Mexico, and it started to catch on now. You launched it, I guess, 7 or 8 months ago. It's been very successful. Can you give us a basic breakdown of how peer-to-peer lending with silver backing works?
Yes, the whole thing started when we had a customer who needed money, and he didn't quite want to sell the bullion he was storing with us. And so he asked if we can provide him a loan. And, at the time, the answer was no. And he ended up selling the bullion. But it kind of gave me that idea that I ought to be finding a way to collateralize bullion without involving banks and without reducing any of the protection or setups that we did. And as I was working through this, it became clear that if we didn't have to give a loan to a customer. Instead, what we could do is provide a framework to allow one customer to give a loan to another customer. And the basic idea is that the borrower would have to have 200% worth of collateral for whichever loan he takes. So if the borrower were to need $100,000, he would need $200,000 worth of gold or silver. And the lender would basically have this bullion locked to guarantee that the repayment of the loan is going to happen. And the whole setup is very, very safe, because if the value of gold or silver were to fall during the life of the loan to 125%, we'll send out a margin call. If it goes down to 110%, we will liquidate the bullion, the borrower, and make sure that the lender is getting his principal and his interest back. And whatever is left will go back to the borrower. It's very unlikely for that to happen because we are running a very conservative system. And, for gold to fall 50% in a year, for it to trigger the liquidation is quite unlikely, but that's the basic setup. And the whole system runs on top of the storage system we built. So that's making it unique, because as far as I know, there's no other system like this. Peer-to-peer system normally involves giving credit to people who need the money and don't necessarily have much collateral. And so a lot of the peer-to-peer systems try to have algorithms to evaluate borrowers and try to figure out if they're creditworthy or not. In our case, the borrowers actually end up being very rich individuals, which can provide 200% worth of collateral. So whereas in a normal system, normally people end up being short on lenders, in our system we are short on borrowers, because we have plenty of people who want to lend the money because it's safe, but we don't necessarily always have enough people who actually want to borrow. But our customers like it, because if you have bullion with us, if you want to take a loan, the current rates are around 3%, 3.5% or so. So you can easily get loans in Singapore dollars or in US dollars, and use them in whichever way you like.
I think one of the natural questions somebody would have is why an ultra-wealthy person who has silver bullion deposited at your facility might want to take a loan. And I can think of several reasons in my head, but maybe with your experience over the past several months, what kind of reasons or what kind of purposes would somebody take out a loan against their silver for?
Well, the most popular use is to buy more bullion. Say, for example, you're buying $50,000 worth of bullion, and you decide you want to buy more than that. Well, you can take out a loan for, say, a year and buy another $25,000 worth of bullion. So that's one way, or one use that we've seen people use that money for. But another example can be interest rate arbitrage. For example, if you can get a loan from us at 3%, 3.5%, and you live in a high interest country, like Australia, mortgages still tend to be, say, 6, 7, 8% in Australia, then you could actually use that money to pay off a portion of your higher interest loan and thereby reduce the amount of interest you have to pay. Now, you might be getting the loan for only 1 year, but the beauty is that you can roll over a loan to another lender any point in time before your money your principal becomes due. So in essence, you can borrow indefinitely as long as, say, collateral value allows it. And that gives people flexibility. So it depends on the borrower on which ways they want to use it. But these were two common scenarios. But, if you want, you can use that money for just about anything because there's no restrictions. Because we have the collateral which acts as security.
Okay, right. And Gregor, let's talk about how this actually works. So if I'm a potential lender, I go to your site, I see what the current offers are out for lending money to potential borrowers. I maybe go ahead and I put in an offer to lend X amount of dollars between the bid and ask, and maybe somebody goes ahead and says, yeah, they want to borrow the money. At that point, how does the transaction work? Is Silver Bullion acting as the escrow agent, and where do I send my money to, and how does the contractual agreement work that I know that my money is being backed by Silver Bullion in your vault?
Well, about the backing, if you're a borrower, you have to have the bullion at our vault. So you actually have to select which individual bullion parcels or which bars you're going to put up as collateral by serial number. And as a lender, you can go in and you can actually see the actual bullion parcels which are there. You can see a photo of them. You can see the test certificates because we test also bullion. And you can see the latest audit and so on. So you have a lot of transparency, that the collateral is indeed there and so it's genuine and so on and so on. So that's the security for the lender. The lender would have to have the money in their account already, or in some cases we can give a credit to the lender, but the lender would, in that case, would have to make sure that the money is in our P2P account before the beginning of the loan start date. So on the loan start date, which occurs 4 times per month, it starts on the 1st, the 8th, the 15th, and the 22nd of the month. So it's roughly starting every week. On those days, the money will be transferred from the lender to the borrower, and at the same time, the bullion will be locked so that the borrower cannot sell it or take delivery of it, and assigned to the lender. The money will then be in the borrower's account, and the borrower can request to have that money sent to his bank account on the next business day. Or he can use the money to buy more bullion through us or use it whichever way he wants. When the loan becomes mature, then the borrower will need to make sure that the money is back in his P2P account by 11 o'clock on the day before the next loan start date.
Excellent. Okay, and in terms of how many people have used the system so far and how sizable transactions are, you said that there's plenty of lenders out there, which is always great in a system where you're trying to have lenders give money to borrowers. How successful has the platform been in its early days?
Well, it started off quite well. We had an initial testing period where we had a number of users use it pre-launch. And we launched it back in August. And since then, we had about 200 loans with an average volume of about 35,000 Singapore dollars, which are around 25,000 US dollars per loan. So in aggregate, that's close to $5 million worth of transaction going through the system. The good thing for people who want to borrow money is that there are pretty competitive offers on there from lenders, because as interest rates are determined by supply and demand of lenders versus borrowers, as we tend to have too many lenders, the interest rates are going down. And if you go to our site, you can actually see each loan, when it was transacted, at which rate, and you can kind of follow how the interest rates are developing. Because in essence, we are creating six markets. We are creating, we have a 6 months, a 12 months, and a 2-year loan in Singapore dollars and in US dollars. So each one of these markets tends to have its own interest rate. What we've been seeing is that lenders prefer shorter term loans, borrowers prefer longer term loans. And so the longer term loans tend to be a bit higher from an interest rate point of view.
Let's finish with one last question on an article that you wrote called Why Bullion Secured Peer-to-Peer Lending is Safer Than Bank Credit. Now that you've walked our listeners through the system that you've built of peer-to-peer lending with silver backing, I think that the silver backing part is self-explanatory. There's something there for the lender to secure the money against. But tell us a little bit about the article and the main thesis there.
Yep. First of all, it can be silver, gold, or platinum. So it doesn't just have to be silver. It can be any type of bullion that's being used as collateral. It's an article about having your money in a bank account versus having it backed. The basic idea is that many people don't understand that when you put money into a bank, that money is no longer yours. Instead, you're becoming a creditor to the bank. The bank can use that money in almost any way they want, and they only need to keep a small amount of that money as a reserve. So in the article, I'm mentioning, Italian banks in particular, because they're extremely vulnerable right now. And the reason I'm saying this is I have a personal experience. I grew up in Italy for 12 years. My dad had vacation rentals in Italy. And we managed to sell these villas in 2007, just before the crash happened. And since then, when we sold it, we sold one villa, for example, for 2.7 million euros. And the buyer ended up financing 2 million euros with a bank. The buyer ended up going bankrupt. He never paid off his loan. The villa went back to the bank. The bank was unable to sell it, and it was just kept on the books and so on. And the villa is now being auctioned off on public auction, but it didn't get sold. So they had a second public auction, and it still didn't get sold. And then we had a third public auction, and it's now going for 20% of the original purchase price. So that means that the bank lost about 1.5 million euros on this loan. And this has been happening all over Italy. It's been happening because in Italy they have some laws now where if you were to rent the property and your renter does not pay rent, it will take 3 years to kick them out. So a lot of people don't want to rent anymore. And this plus increased taxes basically made it very unattractive to have investment property in Italy. In turn, that is causing banks to have a huge problem because the mortgages they gave are now all underwater, or many of them. And as was in Italy, we had 4 banks which actually went bankrupt at the time. And it's just the tip of the iceberg because these banks are all sitting on mortgages which are non-performing. And it just illustrates how if you have your money with a bank, depending on the account, a portion of it might be insured by the government. But if you have a certificate of deposit or you have more than a certain amount, then you're really dependent on that bank not getting into trouble. And so many of these Italian banks are, in trouble. The Economist just wrote an article, I think last week on this issue. And so you got to look from your risk perspective, and you'll find that, banks really aren't that safe. And putting your bullion or your lending money to another individual who has 200% worth of gold, which in turn is fully insured, it's definitely a much safer setup. And it is a setup which can withstand a financial crisis because the bullion will still be there in a financial crisis. And you can still be sure that you get the money back. So that's basically the gist of the article.
Okay, well, Gregor, thank you so much for coming back on the program. I think all of our listeners are going to find your peer-to-peer lending system very exciting and interesting, and of course, a new concept. Where do listeners go to look at the bid and ask on the interest rate spreads and what they can lend and borrow the money for?
The easiest thing is you go to silverbullion.com.sg. It's just like the metal, silverbullion.com.sg, and you click on loans. From the homepage, that's quite easy to see. And from there, you'll be able to see past transactions. You're able to see the current bids, the current asks, and so on. You're even able to look at the collateral. You don't need to make an account. It's all there, public for you to see.
Great. Gregor, thank you so much for coming on the program, and looking forward to having you back on in a short time frame.
Great. Thank you, Colin.
Think you understand the junior mining sector and you think that the participants in the mining sector, junior mining sector, are good people and kind people, hit the bid.
And the world is always going to need raw materials. It's going to need copper and gold and nickel and so forth.
Totally destabilized. Hey, Troll, did you hear what's going on in Yemen? Or are you too stupid?